Content will be approximately 1,700 words. No headings, simple tone, natural storytelling. Safe for YouTube. Lena moved quietly through the large room, carrying a tray of glasses with both hands. She always made sure not to make noise when she walked. She never wanted to disturb anyone or become the center of attention. People often overlooked her, and she had learned to live with that. It was easier this way. She didn't mind blending into the background, or at least that was what she told herself. The event she was working at was a grand one. Expensive lights hung from the ceiling, and soft music played in the background. Guests wore elegant clothes, talking loudly and laughing as if the room belonged to them alone. Lena kept her eyes low as she moved between the groups of people, placing drinks on tables and picking up empty glasses. She had been working at events like this for years. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it helped her pay her bills and stay on her feet. She tried to stay focused on her tasks, but the large grand piano placed near the corner of the hall kept catching her attention. Every time she passed by it, she felt something pull at her. The polished black surface reflected the lights above, and the keys seemed to glow gently. It had been a long time since she had touched a piano, yet the sight of one still stirred something deep inside her. Memories she tried to bury for years came back slowly, and she would quickly look away to avoid thinking too much. No one at the event knew anything about her past. They only saw her as the quiet woman who served food and drinks. She knew that's how people viewed her, and she didn't try to correct them. She had learned that explaining herself rarely changed anything. So she stayed quiet, did her job, and left when her shift ended. But tonight felt different. There was something about this event, something about the atmosphere, that made her uneasy. She could feel eyes on her more than usual. Some guests whispered as she walked by. Others laughed softly, probably not even thinking she could hear them. But she did. Lena always heard more than people assumed. One group of guests especially seemed to be watching her. They were standing near the piano, dressed in expensive suits and dresses. They looked comfortable, confident, and amused, as if everything around them was entertainment made only for them. Lena noticed them staring whenever she passed that side of the room. She tried to avoid their gaze, but it was hard to ignore when whispers turned into small laughs. She kept doing her rounds, hoping their attention would drift elsewhere. But it didn't. When she walked near the piano again, one of the men in the group nudged his friend and pointed at her. The friend smirked, and then the woman standing with them covered her smile behind her hand. Lena felt her stomach tighten. She didn't know what they were thinking, but she had seen that look before. A look that said they had found something amusing. A look that rarely ended well for the person being targeted. She took a slow breath and kept walking, telling herself not to assume anything. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just talking about something else. But deep down, she knew better. As the music continued playing softly through the speakers, Lena placed empty glasses on her tray and turned to head toward the kitchen. But before she could move more than 2 steps, she heard a voice calling out loudly, "Hey, you there. Could you come here for a moment?" She paused. The voice belonged to the same man who had pointed at her earlier. She wanted to pretend she didn't hear him, but ignoring the guest would only cause trouble for her later. So she turned and walked toward them slowly, wishing she could disappear instead. When she reached them, the man smiled at her the way someone smiles when they know something you don't. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile that made her skin tighten. The group of 3 waited for her to speak, but she simply stood with both hands wrapped around her tray. "We were wondering," the man said, glancing at the piano and then at her. "Do you know how to play?" Lena felt her heart skip. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure if he was genuinely curious, or if there was something else behind the question. The woman next to him raised her eyebrows with a playful expression, as if she already knew the answer and expected something entertaining. "It's just a simple question," the man continued, amused by her silence. "You've been staring at this piano all night. We figured you must have some connection to it." A few more people nearby turned their heads, sensing something happening. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She bit the inside of her lip and kept her eyes down. "I used to learn a little," she said softly. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it came out thinner than she hoped. "Used to?" The woman repeated with exaggerated surprise. "Do you mean you can actually play something?" She laughed as if the idea was unbelievable. Lena didn't respond. The man put his hands in his pockets and leaned closer. "How about you play something for us?" He said casually, but there was nothing casual about the expression on his face. Before Lena could answer, another man joined their group, hearing what was happening. "Play something? That sounds fun." "Yes, let her play. Why not? It'll be a nice break from all the talking." Lena shook her head lightly. I'm working right now. I should keep going. There are still many tables." "Come on," the first man cut her off. "Just one song. It'll only take a minute." The woman added, "Don't be shy. We won't judge you. It's just for fun." But Lena could hear the tone behind their words. It wasn't encouragement. It was mockery softened by smiles. More heads turned. People began to whisper. A few even pulled out their phones, expecting something amusing. Lena's chest felt tight. She didn't want to embarrass herself. She didn't want to be laughed at. She also didn't want to draw attention. She had spent years avoiding moments like this. But the pressure grew. The guests were not really asking. They were demanding politely. And she knew how easily things could go wrong for her if she refused. Finally, she nodded. She didn't do it because she wanted to. She did it because she saw no other choice. The man grinned as if he had won a small game. "Great," he said loudly, loud enough for others to hear. "Everyone, gather around. She's going to play something for us." Lena felt her heart beating faster. Her hands, already tired from working, now trembled slightly. She placed her tray down gently on a nearby table. Then she walked slowly toward the piano, feeling dozens of eyes following her. The room, once filled with chatter, started to go quiet as curiosity spread. She sat down on the piano bench, the seat slightly cold beneath her. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She could see the crowd reflected on the polished surface of the instrument. Their faces showed amusement, excitement, and doubt. Some were smiling. Others were whispering to each other, expecting to be entertained at her expense. She swallowed hard and tried to steady her breathing. It had been years since she last played. She didn't know if her fingers still remembered how to move the way they once did. She didn't even know if she could press a single key without her hands shaking. But she also knew something else. Even after all these years, her connection to music hadn't disappeared completely. It had simply gone quiet, waiting somewhere inside her. She closed her eyes for a moment and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She didn't start playing yet. She just let her hands sit there, trying to recall the feeling of being close to music again. Behind her, someone whispered, "This should be interesting." Another whispered back, "I doubt she can even play anything recognizable." Lena opened her eyes slowly. The keys were right in front of her. All she had to do was touch them. All she had to do was try. She pressed one soft note. The sound filled the quiet room, gentle but clear. It was only a single note, but it carried something familiar, something she once knew very well. She pressed another. Then another dot. The whispers faded. The faces in the reflection stopped moving. Lena didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would break under the pressure or find the strength she thought she had lost. But she knew she had made it this far, and she couldn't turn back now. The room waited. She took one more breath, and then she began to play. Lena sat at the piano with her fingers resting on the keys, trying to calm the shaking she felt inside. The room around her had gone oddly still. People who had ignored her all evening were now paying attention, as if she was suddenly part of the event, instead of just someone passing out drinks. She didn't know whether that made her feel worse or better. Mostly, it made her feel exposed. The lights from the chandelier above reflected on the piano's polished surface, and she could see the shapes of the guests in it. Some leaned forward, already expecting something amusing. A few whispered among themselves, and though she couldn't hear their exact words, she knew the tone. She could always tell. She kept her hands still, pressing nothing. Her heart felt like it was rising in her chest, almost reaching her throat. She wished she was invisible again. She wished she hadn't been noticed in the first place. But she reminded herself she had been left with little choice. If she refused, the guests would complain, and the manager who hired her for the night would scold her. She needed her work. Even if this moment felt unfair, she had no room to protest. She breathed in slowly and let her fingers settle into a familiar position. It had been years since she had played anything. Years since she had allowed herself to imagine melodies or feel connected to music. Life had pushed her in other directions, forcing her to focus on survival rather than passion. But even with all the time that had passed, some memories never completely left. She touched one key lightly. The note rang through the hall, soft but clear. The sound made her pause. She let it settle inside her. She touched another, then a third. They were simple notes, not part of any song yet, but they helped her feel grounded. Behind her, a man whispered to his friend, "She's just poking the keys. This will be over fast." Someone else chuckled. Lena didn't turn around. She didn't need to see their faces to understand their expectations. They wanted something to laugh at. They wanted something to tell their friends later. Something that made them feel amused at someone else's expense. She straightened her back, kept her hands on the keys, and focused on breathing evenly. She didn't know if she could play the way she used to, but she knew she didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. So she tried. Very gently. She began to play a melody she remembered from years ago. It started soft, almost fragile. She played slowly at first, letting her fingers find the right places, letting her mind catch up with what her hands were doing. For a moment, she forgot about the audience. She forgot about the long hours she spent working just to manage her life. She forgot about the laughs and the whispers behind her. For a moment, she was just a woman sitting at a piano, remembering something she once loved. The notes flowed more smoothly as she continued. Her hands began to loosen. Her shoulders relaxed a little. She played a simple piece she had practiced hundreds of times when she was younger. It wasn't grand or complex, but it had comfort in it, something soft and familiar. The room began to shift in mood. The amusement faded slightly. People leaned in a little more, trying to understand what they were hearing. A few eyebrows lifted. The whispers grew quieter. The man who had insisted she play crossed his arms, as if trying to understand how she knew where to place her fingers. The woman beside him no longer hid her smile behind her hand. Instead, she looked visibly surprised that Lena didn't notice any of this. She kept her eyes on the keys and let the music guide her. She remembered how her mother used to sit beside her during her practice sessions, how she used to correct her hand position gently, how she would smile softly whenever Lena finally played a piece smoothly. The memory hit her unexpectedly, and for a brief second, her hands hesitated. A small mistake slipped into the melody. Some guests exchanged looks. Someone made a short sound of amusement. Lena swallowed hard and pushed the memory away. Not now, she thought. Not here. She continued playing, smoothing out the mistake quickly. Her hands settled again. The melody returned to its calm flow. When she reached the end of the piece, she lifted her hands slowly from the keys. The sound faded into silence, and in that silence she could feel dozens of eyes on her dot. No one clapped yet. No one laughed. The room was waiting. The first man spoke. "Well, not bad," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite know where to land. But that was a simple tune. Anyone can learn that. Lena lowered her gaze. She knew where this was going. "Play something harder," another person added. "Something real." "Yeah, give us something with energy," someone else said. Lena felt a heavy discomfort settle in her chest. She had only played because they pushed her, but now they expected more. And not because they believed in her, but because they wanted something they could judge. "I don't think I should," she began, but the group interrupted her again. "Come on. You made it this far? Let's see what you can really do." The pressure returned stronger than before. Lena looked down at her hands, which were now trembling again. She didn't feel ready to play anything complex. She wasn't sure she could. She hadn't practiced in so long, and the idea of failing in front of them made her stomach twist. She could refuse, but refusing would turn the crowd against her. They would say she wasted their time. They would complain to the event organizer. They would make her feel even smaller than she already did. She let her hands hover above the keys quietly. She didn't move. She didn't play. She simply breathed, trying to figure out what she should do. The woman who had been watching from the beginning leaned against the piano and said, "You know, if you can't play anything harder, you can just say so. We won't judge." But the look in her eyes said the opposite. Lena felt something inside her tighten. She didn't want to be made fun of. She didn't want them to think she was weak or clueless. She didn't want them to believe she knew nothing. So she stayed sitting. She thought of another piece she knew from her past. It wasn't very long, but it required more skill, more control, more confidence. She didn't know if she still had all of that, but she knew she had once learned it well enough to play it with emotion. She closed her eyes briefly and pictured the sheet music she used to study. She pictured her younger self practicing for hours. She remembered the feeling of finally getting it right. Then she opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. This time, she didn't begin slowly. She struck the first note firmly, letting it ring through the hall. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was confident. The kind of confidence she didn't feel on the inside, but somehow remembered in her fingers. The room quieted even more. Conversations stopped. People put down their drinks. Lena began to play the second piece. It had a clearer rhythm, a steady pace, and a build-up that required precision. Her fingers moved more quickly across the keys, and for the first time all evening, she didn't feel like she was being controlled by the crowd. Instead, she was guiding the moment. She was in charge of the music, even if she wasn't in charge of the room. The surprise on the guests' faces grew. Even the people who had pulled out their phones stopped recording for a moment just to watch. The man who had convinced her to play shifted uncomfortably. He didn't look amused anymore. He looked confused. This wasn't what they expected. Not from the quiet woman in simple clothes. Not from someone they believed they could mock. As she continued, Lena felt something painful and beautiful rising in her chest. She felt the weight of the years she had ignored this part of herself. She felt the sadness of losing something she once loved. And she felt the smallest spark of something she had forgotten: pride. Her tempo grew stronger. Her hands moved with more purpose. She was no longer just remembering the piece. She was feeling it. The longer she played, the more the room shifted. The laughter had vanished. The whispers faded. Now there was only the sound of music and a room full of people listening, trying to understand how someone they overlooked could hold so much talent. Lena finished the piece with a gentle ending. letting the last note linger before lifting her hands slowly. Silence again. Different kind of silence. This one felt heavy. Thoughtful dot, then someone clapped dot soft at first, dot then another dot, and another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. Some clapped out of surprise. Some clapped out of genuine admiration. Some clapped because they didn't know what else to do. Lena blinked slowly, unsure of how to react. She wasn't used to people looking at her like this. She wasn't used to being seen at all. The man who had pressured her stepped closer. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, but his voice no longer carried amusement. Lena looked down at her hands, still resting on her lap. She didn't answer right away. The truth was simple, but she wasn't sure she was ready to speak it. Not yet. She stood up, slowly from the bench. The applause continued behind her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this moment had changed something. Not just for the people watching, but for herself. She walked away from the piano with her heart still racing, unsure of what the night would bring, but knowing the quiet life she had lived just minutes ago no longer felt the same. Lena walked away from the piano with her heart beating fast, unsure of what to do with all the attention suddenly falling on her. The sound of applause still echoed in the back of her mind, even after she stepped into a quieter corner of the room. She wasn't used to this kind of reaction. For years, she had lived quietly enough that most people forgot she existed. But now, in a matter of minutes, her world had been pushed into a spotlight she didn't ask for. She took a slow breath and tried to calm herself. The crowd behind her was still murmuring with excitement. She could hear them whispering about her, replaying what they saw, wondering aloud how someone like her could play with so much skill. Every now and then she heard someone ask, "Who is she?" Or "Where did she learn that?" But she didn't want to turn around and face them. She didn't want their questions. She didn't want to explain anything. She only wanted to finish her shift and go home. She moved slowly back toward the table where she had left her tray, hoping she could return to her duties without being noticed again. But as soon as she reached for the tray, a man stepped in front of her. He wasn't one of the people who had mocked her earlier. His expression wasn't smug or amused. He looked curious, genuinely curious. He smiled kindly, which only made Lena more uncomfortable. "That was beautiful," he said. "You played with so much feeling." Lena stared at the tray, not knowing how to respond. "Thank you," she whispered. "How long have you been playing?" He asked. She shook her head gently. "It's been a long time." Before he could ask anything more, she excused herself quickly and walked away. She didn't want long conversations. She didn't want people trying to get to know her. She just wanted the night to pass. But the night wasn't ready to let her go. As she walked from table to table, picking up empty glasses and wiping surfaces, more guests stopped her to compliment her. Some smiled warmly. Others stared at her like she had been hiding a secret. A few even tried to ask personal questions she didn't want to answer. She felt overwhelmed. This wasn't the kind of attention she found comforting. She didn't play the piano to impress people. She had played because she felt pushed into it, because she didn't know how to escape without losing her job. After some time, she went to the back hallway, where the noise was softer. She leaned against the wall, feeling tired. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the sudden emotional weight of everything that had happened. She stared down at her fingers. They still felt warm from the music. She gently rubbed them, recalling how easily they moved once she started playing. It surprised her. She thought she had forgotten everything. She thought her skills had disappeared with the years. But they were still there, waiting inside her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of the melodies calm her. She realized she had missed the piano more than she ever allowed herself to admit. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lena opened her eyes and straightened quickly. It was the event coordinator, a woman with a clipboard and a stressed expression. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Lena stepped forward nervously. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The coordinator shook her head, looking a little surprised. "Wrong? No, not at all. People can't stop talking about you. They want you to play again." Lena's stomach tightened. "Again?" "Yes. A few of the hosts even asked me if you could perform one more piece before the night ends." She smiled awkwardly. "I know it's not part of your job, but they're really excited about it." Lena felt her breath catch. She hated disappointing people, but she didn't want to return to that piano. Not with all those eyes. Not with all those expectations. "I'm not sure I can," she said quietly. The coordinator tilted her head. "Is everything all right? You seemed fine when you played earlier." Lena hesitated. She didn't want to explain her emotions. She didn't want to explain her past. I just don't think it's a good idea." The coordinator gave her a sympathetic look. "I understand if you're nervous, but I promise, people loved it. They weren't laughing. They were impressed. You should have seen their faces." Lena looked away. She didn't know how to respond. "Please think about it," the coordinator added gently. "If you don't want to, it's okay. But if you're willing, it would mean a lot to the event." She walked away, leaving Lena standing in the quiet hallway with her thoughts spinning. Lena took a deep breath and walked back toward the kitchen. She needed a moment to collect herself. As she set her tray down, a coworker approached her. "I heard you played," he said with a grin. "Everyone's talking about it." Lena pressed her lips together shyly. "I didn't want to," she said softly. "But you did great," he said. "I didn't know you had that kind of talent." She didn't answer. She focused on cleaning her tray, hoping he would walk away. But he didn't. "You know," he said gently, "sometimes life pushes us into moments we're scared of. But maybe those moments aren't always bad." His tone wasn't teasing or intrusive. It sounded sincere. Lena looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the tray. "I don't know," she said quietly. "You don't have to know," he replied. "Just don't run from something good." Lena didn't respond again. The words settled inside her, but she didn't know how to process them. When she stepped out of the kitchen again, the room had grown louder. The hosts were preparing for another part of the event. People were moving around, laughing, talking, drinking. But many eyes still drifted to her. Some smiled warmly when they saw her. Some nodded as if greeting someone important. It made her uncomfortable. As she walked past the piano again, she paused. The bench was still pulled out slightly from when she had sat there. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy surface. She saw a woman who didn't look as invisible as she used to. In that moment, she felt torn between two feelings. One part of her wanted to run from the piano and never look at it again. The other part felt a quiet pull toward it, like a familiar friend she had abandoned too soon. As she stood there, someone approached. It was the man who had pressured her to play earlier. The one whose voice had been loud, whose smile had carried the wrong kind of amusement. But now he looked different. His confidence had softened. His voice wasn't as sharp. "You surprised us," he said. Lena stayed silent, unsure what he wanted. "I didn't expect you to play like that," he continued. "I thought it would be a joke. Something simple." She didn't look at him. "I know," she said softly. He shifted awkwardly. "I shouldn't have pushed you like that." Lena finally turned her eyes toward him. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't smirking. He looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology surprised her. She didn't expect it from him of all people. She nodded slowly. "It's okay." He hesitated before speaking again. "Would you?" Consider playing one more piece, not for us to laugh, not for a joke, but because people honestly want to hear you." Lena looked at the piano again. Her heart began to race. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said gently. "But if you want to, the room is waiting." He stepped back and walked away, leaving her with the decision. She placed her hand on the piano's surface, feeling the coolness beneath her fingertips. The room buzzed softly with anticipation, though no one was looking directly at her. She closed her eyes. She heard her mother's voice in her memory. She heard warmth in it, encouragement, the reminder that music was not meant to frighten her, but to comfort her. She opened her eyes again, slowly. She pulled out the bench. She sat down, and once more, the room began to quiet as people realized what she was about to do. The next morning began quietly for her, though her thoughts were anything but quiet. She woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun touched the windows. For a few minutes, she just sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, replaying the events of the previous night. The way everyone had looked at her, the applause, the sudden silence right before she played, every piece of it still felt unreal. She touched her fingertips together, as if checking whether the talent she had shown the crowd was still with her. Even though she tried to start her day like normal, she could feel a shift inside her. Something new had taken root. She no longer felt like the same simple woman who used to walk quietly through rooms, careful not to draw attention. Last night had changed something, and as much as she tried to push the feeling aside, she couldn't. She made tea, cleaned the small kitchen, folded clothes, and followed the usual routine. But her mind stayed stuck on the moment when the room had gone quiet, when she had stunned them all, when she had proved that she wasn't someone to make fun of. She placed her hand on the counter and took a deep breath. Later that morning, she stepped outside to get fresh air. She walked down the walkway that led to the small garden near her building. The day was warm and bright, but she felt a strange tension. People from her building gave her odd looks, not negative, just curious. Some seemed like they wanted to say something, maybe ask about what happened the previous night, but they hesitated. She didn't blame them. The story had probably spread faster than she could imagine. A simple woman forced to play a piano as a joke, only to reveal she had a gift no one expected. Of course, people would talk. She sat on a bench in the garden and watched the world move around her. Kids were running. Someone was arguing on the phone. A bird hopped around near her shoes. She let out a slow breath. All she wanted was some peace, but peace didn't last long. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was one of those random messages she often got. But when it buzzed again and again, she finally took it out. There were messages, many of them. Some from people she barely knew, some from neighbors, some from workers who had been at that event the previous night. They all said similar things. "We saw what you did. You were amazing. Is it true you used to play professionally? Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Her heart beat a little faster. She didn't know how to respond to any of them. She placed the phone face down on the bench. She couldn't deal with it right now. While she tried to calm herself, she heard footsteps approaching. She lifted her head, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw who it was. It was the host from last night, the man who had planned the large gathering. But this time, he didn't look arrogant or amused. He looked calm. He walked toward her carefully, almost unsure if she'd let him come closer. "Can I sit?" he asked. She hesitated for a second, but then nodded politely. He sat beside her, leaving a small space between them. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked around the garden, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology." She kept her hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt. "I didn't know they were forcing you to play." And I didn't know they were doing it to make fun of you. When I found out, I felt ashamed." She looked ahead, watching the kids run around. "It's fine," she said softly. "It's done now." "It's not fine," he replied. "And it wasn't right." Silence settled again. She could feel he genuinely meant it, but she didn't know what to say. He finally turned to her and asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share her story. But something about the morning, something about the way he asked politely, instead of out of curiosity or gossip, made her answer. "When I was younger," she said slowly, "I used to play every day. My family loved music. My father taught me. It was the one place where I felt free. But things changed. Life changed. I had to work. I had responsibilities. Music became something I did at night when no one was around. Eventually, I stopped." He listened without interrupting. "I always thought," she continued, "that maybe it was better to stay quiet. Better not to draw attention. But last night," he said, "you didn't stay quiet." She gave a small smile. "Last night, I didn't have a choice. They pushed me toward that piano. I didn't want to embarrass myself. So I played the one piece I never forgot." He nodded slowly. "That piece? It changed the whole room." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't expect that." He leaned back slightly. "Would you consider playing again?" "Not for them. Not because someone forced you. But for yourself." She didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure. Music was a fragile part of her life, something she kept hidden. Bringing it back felt risky. Before she could answer, he added, "If you ever want a place to practice, I can arrange that. No crowd, no judgment. Just a piano." She felt a small warmth of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I'll think about it." He nodded in understanding and stood up. "Take your time." And again, "I'm sorry for last night." After he left, she stayed in the garden a little longer. She thought about the piano, about the shock on everyone's faces, about the familiar feeling in her fingertips when she had played. Something inside her whispered that maybe this wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Later that day, she returned home, made a light meal, and tried to rest. But her mind kept drifting back to one memory, the moment when she closed her eyes at the piano and felt like she was somewhere else, like she had stepped into an old dream she thought she had lost. That evening, as she sat by the window watching the city lights, she felt a thought forming. A small, quiet thought, but a powerful one. Maybe she wanted to play. Again, not to prove anything, not to shock anyone, just because it was part of her. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if holding that thought gently, unsure of what to do with it. Would people continue talking about her? Would someone try to drag her back into the spotlight? Could she handle it if they did? The questions felt heavy, and she didn't have answers. But deep down, she felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. She stood up and walked to a small wooden box inside her closet. She opened it carefully. Inside were a few old music sheets, slightly worn but still readable. She touched the edges of the papers, smiling softly. It had been so long. She placed the sheets on the table, sat down, and traced the notes with her fingertip. She whispered the melody under her breath. Even without a piano, she could hear each sound clearly in her mind. The more she looked at the sheets, the more she felt something awaken inside her. That night she didn't sleep early. She stayed up, humming old melodies, remembering chords, remembering how it felt to let music speak for her. Tomorrow, she decided silently, she would go see the host again. She would accept his offer to practice, not because anyone expected her to, but because she wanted to. She didn't know where this path would lead, and that scared her. But at the same time, She felt ready to face whatever came next. Ready to step into a story she didn't know she was still writing. And with that thought, she finally closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, carrying a melody with her into her dreams. The next morning, she woke with a strange mix of nerves and quiet determination. It had been years since she let music be a part of her life, yet now it stood at the front of her thoughts, refusing to be pushed aside. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting the sunlight warm her face as she tried to steady her breathing. Today felt different. Today carried weight. She washed up, made breakfast, and tried to pretend everything was normal, but nothing inside her felt normal. Her mind returned again and again to the idea of playing, practicing, allowing herself to return to something she had lost long ago. There was excitement hiding beneath the surface, but also fear of failure, of judgment, of reliving past disappointments she had never talked about. After finishing her tea, she stood at the window and watched the street below. People walked by with bags. Children hurried to school. Cars moved slowly through the morning traffic. Life continued for everyone else. But hers was changing, quietly and steadily, like a soft melody starting in the distance. She finally took a deep breath and grabbed her small bag. It was time to go. As she walked outside, she noticed that people looked at her a little longer than usual. Some offered small smiles. Some looked curious. One neighbor even gave her a thumbs up before walking away. She had no idea what rumors were spreading, but guessed most of it came from the people who attended the event that night. She kept walking, focusing on the gentle wind brushing her cheek. The host's building wasn't far, but with each step she felt her heart beating faster. Her hands felt warm, almost too warm. She rubbed them together nervously. When she reached the building, she hesitated at the entrance, staring at the large door. She wasn't used to places like this, modern, tall, spotless, with polished glass that reflected the morning sun. She took a slow breath, whispered, "You can do this," and stepped inside. The guard at the reception recognized her immediately. "Good morning," he said politely. "He's expecting you." She nodded and followed him to the elevator. As the doors closed, she watched her own reflection in the shiny metal surface. She appeared calm from the outside, but her eyes held the truth. She was scared, uncertain, and yet somewhere deep inside, she was hopeful. When the elevator reached the top floor, the doors opened to a quiet hallway. The host was already waiting near a glass door, smiling gently. "You came," he said, sounding relieved. She nodded. "I said I'd think about it, and I did." He stepped aside and motioned toward the door. "Let me show you." Inside was a large room filled with warm light and soft colors. The air felt calm, almost peaceful. And at the center of the room stood a grand piano, simple, elegant, and inviting. She froze at the sight of it. He noticed and spoke softly. "No one else knows you're here. No crowd, no pressure. This place is yours to use whenever you want." Her steps were slow as she walked toward the piano. She reached out and brushed her fingertips across the smooth surface. It felt warm beneath her touch, familiar yet distant, like meeting an old friend after years apart. "Take your time," he said. Stepping back to give her space. She sat down carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on her knees. She took one more deep breath before letting her fingers reach for the keys. The moment her fingertips touched them, something heavy inside her lifted. Memories flooded her mind. The late nights she spent practicing as a child, her father's proud smile, the way music used to echo through her small home. She pressed a single key. The note rang out, clear and bright. Her eyes softened. Then she played another note, and another. Finally, she began to play a simple melody. It was rough at first, uneven in places, but as she continued, Her hands remembered the way. The music grew fuller, smoother, warmer. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. The host listened quietly from a distance. His arms crossed gently as he leaned against the wall. He didn't speak, didn't move much, afraid that even a small sound might disturb her moment. With each passing second, the melody became more confident, more alive. She closed her eyes as she played, letting herself sink into the rhythm. She didn't think about the people who mocked her. She didn't think about the crowd that night. She didn't think about the years she spent hiding her talent. For the first time in a long time, she was playing for herself. After several minutes, the melody came to a soft end. She let her hands rest on the keys as silence filled the room once again. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She opened her eyes, but didn't look at him yet. She kept staring at the piano keys, her fingers still touching them gently. "It felt strange at first," she admitted. "But once I started, it felt right." He nodded. "It sounded right." She finally turned to him with a small smile. "Thank you for letting me use this place." "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "If anything, I should be thanking you. What you did the other night, it reminded me that talent can be found anywhere, even in the most unexpected people." His words made her look down shyly. She wasn't used to compliments. "I just played what I knew," she murmured. "But you didn't just play," he said gently. "You changed the entire room." She didn't argue. Instead, she let the words settle quietly inside her. After a short pause, he asked, "Would you like to practice more? Or would you prefer some time alone here?" She thought for a moment before saying, "I'd like to stay alone for a bit, if that's okay." "Of course." He gave a respectful nod and walked to the door. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." When he left, she took another deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys again. She played new melodies, old melodies, half-forgotten ones that came back slowly. Some pieces came out rough, others smooth. But every sound made her feel more alive. Hours passed without her noticing. Finally, she lifted her hands and rested them in her lap. She felt tired, but in a good way, like something inside her had opened up after being locked away for years. When she stepped outside, he looked up from his phone. "How was it?" She smiled softly. "Healing." He nodded with warmth. "You're welcome to come back tomorrow. Or any day." She thanked him and left, walking down the streets with a lighter heart. The city felt brighter. The world felt gentler. When she reached home, she placed the old sheet music back on the table and ran her fingers across them again. But this time, she felt no sadness, only hope. That night, she hummed softly to herself while preparing dinner. Even while cleaning the dishes, she felt her fingers tapping patterns on the counter, following invisible melodies. As she sat by the window, looking at the quiet street below, she realized something important. Music had never really left her. It just waited patiently until she was ready to return. And now she was. Before going to bed, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I'll play again." The thought filled her with calm excitement, a feeling she hadn't known for years. She lay down, closed her eyes, and drifted into sleep with a gentle rhythm playing in her mind, a rhythm that promised even more in the days to come. The morning began quietly, but inside her heart there was a soft excitement she hadn't felt in many years. The past week had been full of small steps forward, each one bringing her closer to the music she once loved. And today felt like a turning point, though she didn't yet know why. She woke early, stretched her arms, and took a moment to breathe in the calm air of her home. The light coming through the window made gentle patterns on the floor, reminding her of the soft glow in the piano room she had practiced in. She made tea and sat at the table, her fingers tapping lightly on her cup as if they were already playing invisible notes. She knew she would go back to the piano later in the day, but something felt different this morning. She felt stronger, more sure of herself. Not completely confident, but no longer scared of being seen. She sipped her tea slowly, thinking about how far she had come. A week ago, she wouldn't have imagined standing up to a room full of people. She wouldn't have imagined playing in front of strangers, or accepting compliments, or allowing herself to step into a world she had once walked away from. But life had pushed her into that moment, and what she found within herself had changed everything. After finishing breakfast, she went to her closet and opened the wooden box where she kept her old music sheets. She took them out carefully, smoothing the edges with her hands. These papers had been with her through many phases of life. They were worn, a little faded, but filled with memories. She decided to take them with her today. When she stepped outside, the air was warm, and the street was quiet. She walked calmly, her bag hanging lightly from her shoulder. She passed neighbors who greeted her with friendly nods. And although she still wasn't used to the new attention, she returned their smiles politely. Near the corner store, she saw two older women whispering together. When they noticed her, they stopped talking and smiled. One of them said, "We heard about what happened the other night. You must be very talented." The woman felt shy, but managed to respond softly, "I just played something I remembered." The woman nodded kindly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." She thanked him and continued walking, her heart warm but slightly uneasy. She didn't want attention, not the kind that came with gossip. She just wanted to play again, quietly, honestly, for herself. She reached the building and entered, feeling more comfortable than before. The guard greeted her with a smile. "Good to see you again," he said. "Good morning," she replied gently. When she got to the top floor, the host was already there, waiting in the hallway. His smile was warm, not pushy or proud, just calm. "You're early," he said. "I woke up early." She answered softly. He nodded. "The room's ready for you. Take your time." She appreciated that he never pressured her, never acted like she owed him anything. He simply opened a door to something she had once lost, and now she was slowly walking through it again. Inside the practice room, sunlight fell across the piano in a soft golden line. She set her bag down, took out her music sheets, and placed them carefully on the piano. She sat quietly for a moment, letting her hands rest on her lap. Then she began to play. The first melody was gentle and slow, one she remembered from childhood. Her father used to hum it when he worked around the house. She played it softly, letting the memory guide her fingers. The sound filled the quiet room, warming the air like a familiar embrace. As she played, she felt something shift inside her, a deep comfort, a sense of belonging. She wasn't performing. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply connecting with a part of herself she had forgotten. After the first piece, she played another, then another. Some melodies were clear, others wavered a little, but each one felt like a piece of her story coming back. She didn't know how long she had been playing when the door opened quietly. She stopped and turned. It wasn't the host. It was someone else, a woman from the event night. She had been part of the group that watched her play that evening. The woman looked unsure, almost nervous. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "He told me I could come in. I hope I'm not interrupting." She hesitated, but nodded politely. "It's okay." The woman stepped in slowly. "I wanted to apologize. The other night, some people were not very kind, and I didn't say anything. I should have. I didn't know you could play like that. But even if you couldn't, no one should have treated you the way they did." The pianist looked down briefly, then back at the woman. She appreciated the honesty. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman continued, "I also wanted to tell you something. After you played, you changed the room." People were stunned. Not just because you were good, but because you reminded everyone that you can't judge someone by what they look like, or what job they have, or how quiet they are. She listened quietly, unsure how to respond. "I hope you keep playing," the woman said. "I think the world needs people like you." The pianist took a breath. "I'm trying," she said simply. The woman smiled warmly and left without staying too long. The pianist sat still, feeling the weight and lightness of the moment together. After she gathered her thoughts, she began to play again. This time, the melody was fuller, stronger, almost as if her heart had found new space. When she finished, the host returned. "You played for a long time today," he said. She nodded. It felt good. He looked at her music sheets. "Those look important." "They are," she said quietly. "They're part of my past." "Then maybe they can also be part of your future," he suggested. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the room, imagining what her future could be now. Would she perform again someday? Would she teach? Would she simply play for herself at home? She didn't know, but she felt ready to find out. When she left the building later that day, she walked through the city with lighter steps. The world felt richer, like there were new colors hidden in the familiar sights around her. Back at home, she opened her window and let the warm afternoon breeze drift in. She set her music sheets on the table once more and stared at them with gentle determination. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a simple woman who blended into the background. She felt like someone who had something valuable to offer, something that came from her heart. That evening, as the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, she closed her eyes and pictured the piano keys beneath her fingertips. She imagined herself playing in brighter spaces, calmer spaces, maybe even sharing her music with others one day. She didn't need fame. She didn't need attention. All she needed was the courage to keep going. Before bed, she whispered to herself, "I'm not done. Not anymore." She lay down and felt a peace she hadn't known for a long time. The world had tried to silence her, to shrink her, to make her feel small. But music had lifted her back up, and she wasn't afraid anymore. She closed her eyes. The melody of her journey still warm in her heart, journey that had started from mockery and turned into something beautiful, something powerful, something truly hers. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She would keep playing, and the world, whether it watched or not, would never be the same again. She stood on the quiet porch that early morning, feeling the warm sun slowly rise behind her. The house around her was calm now, a kind of peace she never thought she would feel again after everything that happened. For a long moment, she simply breathed, letting the fresh air settle her thoughts. It felt like the first time in days that she could let her shoulders relax. Even though the night before had been overwhelming, she knew deep inside her that something powerful had happened, something she herself had not fully understood yet. After the performance at the hall, her life seemed to shift in ways she could not have imagined. People who once looked down on her